Recording in progress.
Today's Daf Be'ez Hashem is Masechta Gittin Daf Vav. We will begin on Daf Yomi Beis, approximately 6 lines from the bottom, 7 lines from the bottom, with the Gemara beginning Bar Hedya. Okay, so we're discussing the topic of bringing a get from Medina Siyam to Eretz Yisrael, and the topic is saying B'fani Nechtam, B'fani Nechtam. So the Gemara says over here, Bar Hedya boya latuya gita. Bar Hedya wanted to bring a get from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael. Now he's going to be the one. This Bar Hedya is going to be the one that's going to have to say B'fani nechtam, B'fani nechtam. I saw it being written. So what does it mean? He saw it being written. He came in front of Rav Acha to have a mamuna agita. Rav Acha was the one in charge of Gittin, and Rav Acha was the expert on Gittin. As we're going to learn that whoever is not an expert should not have anything to do with it, because the mistakes are very costly if you make a mistake with Gittin and Kedusha. So Rav Acha was an expert on Gittin and Kedusha. Amalei, so Rav Acha advised this Bar Hedya, you have to say, as the sofer is writing every letter of this get, presumably to make sure that he's writing it lishma. So that's what the advice of Rav Acha told him. So you have to see the get being written from the beginning to the end. Then when you become a shliach and bring it to Eretz Yisrael, then you can comfortably say B'fani nechtam, B'fani nechtam. Also, the comment of Rabbi Ami Rabasi, so Rabbi Hedya wasn't satisfied. So he came in front of Rabbi Ami Rabasi and posed the same question. The question is, do I really have to be there by every letter of the Sefer writing the get? Relates, so they both told him, you don't have to stay there every letter and to watch every letter being written. In fact, you shouldn't even do that. You should just see maybe the first line, and that's it. And then you can assume that the Sefer knows what he's doing and is going to write the rest of the get lishma. The chitema, you're going to say a'aved l'chumra. If you're going to say I should go strict and say that you should see every line of the get, then you're going to cause a defamation against all the other previous gittin, where the shliach that brought the get did not see every line being written. And if you're going to say now a new psak, that a new chumrah, that from now on, if you're a shliach, you have to be a witness and see every letter that the sofer is going to write, then the gittin that were born previously that did not have that chumrah, people are going to say that wasn't a good get, and then it'll come out. People will say people are mamzerim, etc., etc. So don't make this new chumrah. All you have to do is see basically that the sofer is writing lishma. You don't have to see the whole thing, him writing lishma, and you're a good shliach. Rabba Bar Chana brought a get. Palge ichtav kamei, palge leichtav kamei. Half the get was written in front of him, and half the get was not written in front of him. Also, lekame Rab Elazar. He came in front of Rab Elazar. Amalei, Rab Elazar told him straight out, "You're right. You don't have to see the whole thing, even if you saw half is good." Not only that, Rab Elazar told Rabba Bar Chana, even if you saw just one line being written in Shema. For example, the names of the parties involved, or you just saw the first line that's written in the get. Shuvei nitzarch, you don't have to see the rest of the get as it's written lishma. So that was Rabbi Lazar told him. It's continuing the conversation that we are discussing. Rav Ashi says that you don't even have to. We go to Daf Vav Amar Aleph. You don't even have to see the Sefer writing. How about this? If you hear the Sefer saying that I'm about to write a get lishma, in other words, he's preparing his pen, and he's saying, I'm preparing this pen to write a get lishma, or he's preparing a parchment, and he's saying, I'm about to write this get lishma. So even if you didn't see him actually writing the get, that's considered that the shliach could say b'fani nechta, because now he's aware that the Sefer knows the halachas of lishma. That's enough. That's enough. And probably if he recognizes the cloth that the Sefer now was preparing to prepare that it should be the get, so that should be enough, even if he did not see the Sefer actually write on the parchment the get. Tanya Kavasi Rav Ashi, I'll prove it to you, like Rav Ashi said, that you do not have to see the exact, even the Sefer writing it. Just seeing that the Sefer mentioned that he's going to write a get lishma, that's also good. Because the Brisa says, "Hamevi get me Medina Siyam." If someone brings a get from Medina Siyam, afilu hu babayis v'sefer baliyah. even if the shliach was in the house and the sofer writing the get was in the attic, second floor. Hu ba'aliyah v'sofer b'bayis, or the opposite. He was in the attic and the sofer writing the get was in the house. Even if he walked into the house and left the house the entire day, kosher, the get is kosher. That means he could be a witness saying b'fanei nechtav, it was written l'shma. You don't have to be. It's like a mashgiach in a kosher and for kosher products. You don't have to be there the whole time. So the Gemara says the question, and this is how it's going to be approved to Rav Ashi. Who babayis or sofer baliyah? How could that be good enough if he's on the bottom floor and the sofer is on the top floor? He didn't see that the sofer writing it lishma. So how could he say definitively that it was written lishma? Lav, it must be going dishma kan kumasa bekam megilsa. He heard the sound of the pen being prepared by the sofer, on the parchment being prepared by the sofer, and the sofer saying out loud that I'm going to write this get lishma. So therefore, even if he didn't see the actual writing of the get, that's good enough. So we see that's a proof to Rav Ashi that you don't even have to see the sofer writing, even just seeing the pen, even hearing that the sofer is going to write get lishma, that's good enough. And hearing him prepare for that service. Now the Gemara, just going back to the Brisa, Amar, you said in the Brisa, if the shliach walks in and out where the sofer is writing the get, it's kosher. So the Gemara says, man, who's walking in and out when the sofer is writing the get? If you're going to say it's the shliach walking in and out, of course, he doesn't even have to be there. He doesn't even have to walk into the room. When he's on the bottom floor and the sofer is on the top floor, you're saying it's kosher, right? You're saying it's kosher. So of course, nichnas v'yotzim abayit. Just so then, when the shliach is going in and out of the house and he's actually seeing the sofer, certainly it's going to be kosher. So who walked in and out of the house? So the Gemara says, El sofer. It must be that the Bryce is saying that even if the sofer interrupted his writing and walked out of the house, it's kosher. And then he came back and continued his writing, it's kosher. So he didn't do lishma in one sitting. He got up, took a walk in the street, and then came back and continued writing. So the Gemara says, Mshita, what's wrong with that? Just because he walked in and out, we're going to passel the get. He just interrupted it. It doesn't have to be written in one breath. Answers the Gemara, the nifket l'shuk. He did indeed go to the main market fair and came back. And therefore, why would I think it should be a passel get? Mahu the same. I might think maybe he found another guy in the street, and the guy happens to have the same name, and his wife happens to have the same name as the get he's writing. And so the sofer is thinking to himself, is the current get that I'm writing right now, is the guy gonna pay me? Maybe I should think about the person I met in the street, then I'll write the get now for the person I met in the street. And then what happens, that the first guy ended up paying him, and he says, oh, you could keep the get because it's your name and her name is on the same get. So her name and the husband's name is there. So if he turns around and gives it back to the first guy, it will turn out that he didn't write lishma. He wrote it thinking about the guy that he met on the street with the same name. And he wasn't thinking about the guy he's actually writing for, but that's what happens when you take a break. So I might think taking a break would passel a get, kamash malon, just taking a break would not passel the get. Zog the Gemara, Itmar, we have a discussion, machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. Itmar, we learned, Bavel, the whole Babylon, Iraq. What's the din? Is it like Babylon was a big Jewish community? Of course, the Talmud was written there. Rav said, Eretz Yisrael Gittin. It has a din like Eretz Yisrael Gittin. Just like by Gittin, if you bring the get from one side of Israel to another side of Israel, you don't have to say b'fani nechta, even if it's one country to another country in Eretz Yisrael. So same thing by Bavel. If you bring it from one area of Bavel to another area, let's say you go from North Bavel to South Bavel, you don't have to say b'fani nechta. So wow. That is what Rav said. And Rav is basically saying that Bavel, always, from the time the Jews came to Bavel, there was always a big Jewish community, a very learned Jewish community. So everybody knows about the concept of about the concept of lishma probably and how to write a get properly. So you do not have to say b'fani nechta, b'fani nechta. Shmuel says kechutz laaretz. Shmuel says it's like chutz laaretz. So if you bring from let's say North Bavel to South Bavel, bring a get, the shliach has to say b'fani nechta, b'fani nechta. So the Gemara wants to understand what is the root of the machlokes. Lema b'hal kami palgi. Let us say that this is what they're arguing about. The Marsov a Rav holds with Fishain Bekin Lishma, because why do you have to say funny nectar? Because you assume that the Sofer didn't write the get correctly. But if it's written in Bavel, it's going from north to south of Bavel, so you can assume that it's a kosher get. It was written Lishma, so that therefore Rav says you don't have to say funny nectar. Bahani Gemiri, the Bavel, they're very learned. They were always learned in Bavel. But Shmuel holds Lefisha Ein Edim Tzun Lekaimai. Bahani Nami L'Shchichi. Since you're going from one country north of Bavel to south of Bavel, and we're assuming that there's no free travel between north and south Bavel, because let's say north was controlled by the Greeks and the south Bavel was controlled by the Persians, so the travel is not so common, and therefore we're afraid that the husband is going to come later on and say the get was never written by him. So therefore we will require the shliach to say b'fani nechta. So that's why Rav Shmuel holds it's kechutz laaretz, and therefore you do have to say b'fani nechta. Bahani nami l'shchichi, between one area of Bavel to the other area of Bavel, there's no traveling between, there's no common travel between north and south, and therefore you're never sure. Maybe the husband will say he never wrote the get, so you need to verify the get by having the shliach saying, I know that this is a kosher get. So that's why Shmuel said you have to say b'fani nechta. So Gemara says, "V'tizbra, is your understanding correct?" Harabba Islay the Rava. Even Rabba would hold that Rabba didn't say that Ein Bekin L'Shema, that's the only reason why you have to say Fani Nechta. Rabba holds of the reason of Rava that the reason is also, and probably the main reason is Ein Eidim Mitzuyin L'Kaimai, that we have to verify, because if the husband comes and say that he didn't write the get, and then there'll be a big problem until we find Eidim to authenticate this get. So therefore, right away, off the top of the bat, you have to ratify and authenticate this get. So even Rabbah would hold that that's the reason. It's just another reason why Rabbah said that you have to say b'fani nechta is because of the Shema. But also he would hold of the reason ein eidim mitzuyin l'kaima. So again, why would Rav hold that in Bavel you do not have to say b'fani nechta? If we're dealing in a situation where there's no easy travel between north and south of Bavel, even if you hold you have to say b'fani nechta because ein bekin l'shma, you would still should have to say b'fani nechta because you ain't eidim mitzuyin l'kaimai. Ella says the Gemara the Kuli Alma, everybody holds b'inin l'kaimai. That's the real reason why we are afraid that the husband, you need to authenticate this get. That's the first reason. So the Rav, that's why Rav holds that when the shliach comes, we don't need him to authenticate the get. The shliach could go home. Why? Keeping the ikam mesibasa mishkechichet. Since there are people learning back and forth, and there's a constant travel, even though maybe north was by the Greeks and south of Bavel was by the Persians, but there's constant travel between them. So therefore, it's common to be able, if the husband will come one day make a problem, we'll easily get this authenticated by getting Eidim who recognize the signature. So we don't require the shliach to say b'fani nechta, because when the problem comes, we'll solve it then. It's not so easy to get somebody to authenticate a get. You're going to get yeshiva boys. They don't know how they don't recognize signatures. They're busy learning, and therefore, yes, there's travel back and forth, but it's the wrong people. When there's going to be a problem with this get, what are you going to get? Who are you going to bring over to authenticate the signatures? A yeshiva guy? A yeshiva guy is not trusted to recognize signatures. That's why Shmuel said that in Bavel, when you go from one area of Bavel to another area of Bavel, you have to say Fani nechta. Itmanami, we learned the same idea. When Rav came to Bavel, he paskin that always Bavel had a din of Eretz Yisrael, even prior to when Rav came. Always Bavel it was like Eretz Yisrael, and they never established a concept of going from one area of Bavel to another area of Bavel. If there's easy travel, you don't have to say b'fani nechdam, b'fani nechdam. Okay, so now the Gemara asks the question: you telling me that in Bavel you don't have to say b'fani nechdam, b'fani nechdam? Moshe Rav Yirmiyah asked a question. Rav Yehuda Omer Merekem leMizrach, Rekem kemizrach. The borders of Eretz Yisrael are from Rekem to the east, and Rekem is chutz laaretz and has a din like the east. Now Ashkelon Darim, Ashkelon Kedarim. The south of Israel is Ashkelon, and Ashkelon, the city of Ashkelon, is actually already starting chutz laaretz. Me'akel Tzofin, Akoi in the north, the Akoi Tzofin. Akoi is the first city outside of Israel at the north, and so therefore, if you come from all these places, you come from, let's say, Akoi to Eretz Yisrael, you have to say b'fani nechdam, b'fani nechdam. So the Gemara says like this. So the Bavel, let's find in the Eretz Yisrael kaima. Bavel is in the north of Israel. The Ksiv, so the Ksiv. The Yom Hashem Elai Mitzafati Pasach Hara. In Yirmiyah, when God was telling him where the destruction is going to come from, it's coming from the north, Bavel. Utnam Name Rab Meir Oima Akoi Eretz Yisrael Gittin. Rab Meir said Akoi is like Eretz Yisrael Gittin. Akoi is not Chutz Laaretz. Akoi, although it's in the north, it's not outside Eretz Yisrael. Akoi is part of Israel. Now, so the Gemara finishes its question. Rab Meir only said that Akoi has a din of Eretz Yisrael because it's so close to Israel. Aval Bavel Bavel is chutz laaretz because it's so far away from the Eretz Yisrael. Bavel, from our Mishnah, it would seem to imply that Bavel is Medina Sayam. So Bavel has a din like Medina Sayam from our Mishnah. So how could Rav say that Bavel is like a Eretz Yisrael and has a din of Eretz Yisrael? It's not an extension of Eretz Yisrael. Our Mishnah seems to say that once you leave the confines of Israel, everything else is chutz laaretz, and you would have to say b'fani nechdam, even if you travel within the Medina Sayam, you would have to say b'fani nechdam. So how did Rav say that Bavel is like Eretz Yisrael? It says the Gemara, that's the one that asked the question, Rabbi Yirmiyah. He answered it himself. Levarma Bavel. Our Mishnah means the exception is Bavel. Bavel is like a Eretz Yisrael, but not in Eretz Yisrael. So there are two Eretz Yisraels. One Eretz Yisrael is Eretz Yisrael, and one Eretz Yisrael is Bavel. And each one have the same din, and you don't have to say b'fani nechdam. So the Gemara now wants to know what is considered Bavel. Once you establish that Bavel is like another Eretz Yisrael, so then what is Bavel? What are the borders of Bavel? Amar Papa kamachlekes liyachzon kach machlekes legittin. Rabbi Yosef machlekes legittin liyachzon aval legittin debihakol ad arba tinyana de gishra. Rav Papa says we have a known machlokes of what's Bavel when it comes to marriage, because the people of Bavel were makbid not to have any psul in their family. So take whatever we learned in Masechta Kedushin, the Bavel, the borders of the Bavel are, apply it to Masechta Gittin. Rabbi Yosef says no. By Yichsen, that was the border, but Gittin everybody holds until the second set of willow trees when you cross a certain bridge. So he tweaked it a little bit, that where the borders of Bavel are. Now the Gemara says, Rav Chizda Matzruch Me'akatesran Lebei Adrashir, from one part of Akatesran, which is a place in Bavel, to Ardashir, across the Chidekel, the Tigris. So if you brought it from this part of Bavel to the Bei Adrashir, you have to say b'fani nechta. But if you go the reverse, Bei Adrashir Akatesran Loy Matzruch. But if you went from Adrashir to Akatesvan, you don't have to say b'fani nechta and b'fani nechta. So the Gemara doesn't understand that. Why in Bavel itself, from you going from one place to another place, you do have to say, but the opposite way, you don't have to say. Lema Kesava made us say that Rav Chizda held that the main reason why you say b'fani nechta is with Vishaim B'kin Lishma and Hani Gemiri. The people of Bei Adrashir are so know how to write a get that when you bring a get from Bei Adrashir to Akatesvan, you do not have to say b'fani nechta because we can assume that it was written kosher. So that's why it makes sense. But Akatesvan, they don't know how to write a get, so therefore you have to say when you bring it from Akatesvan to Bei Adrashir, the reverse way, you do have to say. So the Gemara says, "V'tizra." Does that make sense? Well, Rabbi Islay the Rabba. Rabba holds like Rabba, and therefore, if you're going from one place to another place, if it's very hard to get from one place to another place, and I'm saying that these two places were on two sides of a river, so it was not so easy travel. So of course you would have to say, "B'fani nechtem, b'fani nechtem." Ella. The answer is everybody holds that the reason why b'fani nechtem is because you need to authenticate the get. That's the reason why you have to say b'fani nechtem. You want it to be known as a kosher get right from the get-go. So it has to be authenticated right before you give it to the woman. That's the reason. So bahani kaven the azalil shukis hasam hanech yade b'chasimis yade. The reason why when you go from a adrashur to aktesvan, you don't have to say b'fani nechtam is because the main marketplace was in Akatesvan. So Adrashir people would come to Akatesvan and they would sign their documents there in Akatesvan. So the people in Akatesvan always knew all the signatures of the people in Adrashir. So therefore, you don't require a get to the guy to say b'fani nechtam, because when it's brought from Adrashir to Akatesvan, even if there's going to eventually be a problem with this get, you'll always get somebody to recognize, to authenticate the get. So it's not going to be in limbo. So therefore, they did not require to say "Fani nechtef" if you're bringing it from Adrashir to Akatesvan. But if you go in the reverse order, then it's not so, because there's the people of when the people of Adrashir are not familiar with the signatures of the people of Akatesvan, so therefore, if you brought a get from Akatesvan to Adrashir, you do have to say "Fani nechtef." That's what the Gemara says. Even the Azal Shuki, since the Adrashir go to the marketplace in Akatesvan, therefore Akatesvan people know the signatures of the people of Adrashir. But it doesn't work in the reverse way. My tam b'shuka 3D, because the people when the people of Adrashir go to Akatesvan, they're just so busy in their businesses and doing transactions and not focusing in how people of Akatesvan sign their documents, and therefore they're not familiar with the signatures. So if a get was brought from Akatesvan to Adrashir, you would have to say "Fani nechtem." Says the Gemara, Rabba Bavar Uva in Mechuza. There's a place called Mechuza. The Gemara tells you something else about Bavel. Rabba Baravu Matzroch Ma'ars La'arsa, Rav Sheshes Matzroch B'Shchuna L'Shchuna, Rava Matzroch V'Isha Shchuna. In the city of Mechuza, which is a place in Bavel, Rabba required that to say b'fani nechtav, even if you're bringing it from across the street, from across one big avenue to another cross big. Imagine Ocean Parkway. You bring it from the get from one side of Ocean Parkway to the other side of Ocean Parkway. And Rav Sheshes says from one neighborhood to another neighborhood. And Rava says even in that neighborhood, even if you have a small, tiny neighborhood in Mechuza, you have to say b'fani nechtav and b'fani nechtav. Wait a second, but Rava, who the didn't Rava say that the whole reason why you say b'fani nechtav is because you need to be able to authenticate it, because if you bring it from a far place, you can't authenticate it. But if you're bringing it from one neighborhood to another neighborhood in Mechuza, so if you're going to have a problem, you'll be able to authenticate it right away. So why did Rava require you to say "Fani nechtav," even within one neighborhood? Let's say a few blocks away, you have to say "Fani nechtav." What could be the problem? Answers the Gemara, Shani b'nei Mechuza the Noidi. The people of b'nei Mechuza were always out of town. They were people who did business by traveling. So if there's going to be a problem in this get, it's not going to be easy to find somebody who recognizes the signatures, even if it's within one neighborhood, because you're going to go back to the few blocks away to try to get somebody to authenticate the get. They won't be able to authenticate it because the person who might be on a business trip who can authenticate it. Therefore, Rava required that in the vicinity of Mechuza, no matter where you're going within Mechuza, you always have to say b'fani nechtav. Says the Gemara, a new story. Rav Chana and Mishtai. Rav Chana was telling a story. Rav Chana Rav Chana brought a get within Bavel. Either it was from Surah to Nardoi or Nardoi to Surah. Also the Kamad Rav. So he came to front of Rav. Now it's in Bavel, and probably it was easy travel from Nardoi to Surah. So Amalei, he asked Rav, do I have to say or do I do not have to say? It's easy travel and it's Bavel, so everybody knows Lishma. Amalei, so Rav said simple, you don't have to say it. But it's not a bad idea to say it. We go to Vavam Abayis, the Avet Ahanit. If you do say it, it's a good idea. My Avet What does it mean if you do say it, it's a good idea? The Osir Baal Ma'ara loy meshkachim be. Because if the Baal would one day complain that this is a problem get, that he never wrote it, we're not going to pay attention. So it's always good for the shliach to say b'fani nechtav, even though he doesn't have to, because once the shliach authenticates, the husband who will come later and say, I never wrote the get, we will never believe him because the shliach said b'fani nechtav. Kidditanya, we find this story like this in Eretz Yisrael. The same story happened. A person brought a get before Rabbi Shmuel. Do I have to say? So Rabbi Shmuel asked him, where are you from? So Amalai, he said, Rabbi Mikfar Sisai ani. I am from Kfar Sisai. I'm from Kfar Sisai, and I'm coming from one place in Israel to another place in Israel. So there's easy travel. Amalai, Rabbi Shmuel told him, even though there's easy travel, and it's in Eretz Yisrael, I would recommend why? That they should never need Adam. In other words, that should the husband come one day and make a problem, you're the best witness. You will trust you. You say the husband will never be believed. After this person left, Rabbi Loi came in, and he thought that Rabbi Shmuel said you have to say it. You see, it was different than Rab. He said you should say it. But Rabbi Loi says, what do you mean? You're in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Loi Kfar Sisai Muvlas B'Tchum Eretz Yisrael. Kfar Sisai is part of Eretz Yisrael. Kfar Sisai is part of Israel. It's more closer to Tzipori than Akoi. Akko is already Israel, according to Rab Meir. Certainly, Kfar Sisai. Rabbanim only argue against Rab Meir only because it's far away. Kfar Sisai, certainly the Rabbanim will hold that it's part of Eretz Yisrael. So Rabbi Loi doesn't understand why Rabbi Shmuel said you're bringing from one area of Israel to another area of Israel, and it's easy travel. So why did Rabbi Shmuel say that you have to say b'fani nechtam? So he said that's what I meant. Be quiet, my son, be quiet. Don't think that because you don't have to say it, that if you do say it, you make it worse. Just the opposite, you make it better. Because now, since now we said it's a very powerful statement by the shliach. We'll never trust the husband again. So it is a good idea to say it. So the Gemara says, so then why did Rabbi Eloi have this question? Isn't that what he said? That isn't the Rabbi Shmuel said, I don't want you to ever need Adam. So that's why Rabbi Shmuel said to the shliach, say it. And says, so why did Rabbi Eloi had this whole problem? And says the Gemara, Rabbi Eloi did not finish his statement. So therefore, Rabbi Eloi made a mistake. He thought that Rabbi Shmuel required you to say it. But he didn't understand that Rabbi Shmuel meant to say that it is a good idea to say it, so that we will never have a problem with this get, even if the husband comes and says it is a psul in the get. New Gemara. Sholchele Rav Yosef Rav Chizah. Rav Yosef said to Rav Chizah, Gittin Haboy Misham Lekam. The get that comes from you, Rav Chizah lived in Bavel, and if it comes to Israel, Rav Yosef said, if you bring a get from from Bavel to Israel, again, because Bavel is like another Israel, so it's bringing from Israel to Israel. So he said that if you bring from Bavel to Israel, you don't have to say. So the Gemara wants to understand. What's the problem? Maybe the whole reason why Rav Yosef said the whole reason why you say b'fan nefan because lishma, and Bavel, they know how to write and get lishma. That's why he did not require b'fani nechta. Is that the reason what Rav Yosef did not require b'fani nechta when you bring a get from Bavel? The Tisbra, does that make sense? For Rabbi Yislay the Rava holds up Rava. And therefore, how easy is it to travel from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael? So if there's no easy travel, you still would require you to say, to authenticate the get. Ella says the Gemara, the Kuli Ama Bini Lakaima. Everybody holds you have to authenticate the get. If there's no easy travel from where the get is coming from, you have to authenticate the get right away. But when you bring it from Bavel to Israel, there's no problem. It's like the cave of the Ikarabim, the Salkim, and the since there are many people going back and forth, particularly people who are learning, they would go back from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. So there's good transportation between one Bavel and Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, if there ever was a problem with a get, it won't be standing in limbo for weeks. You'll be able to solve the problem very quickly. So therefore, you don't have to say b'fani nechtam. Again, it's a good idea to say it, but if it didn't say it, that's okay too. Rav Yosef said. So Rav Yosef said that you don't have to say b'fani nechtam if you bring a get from Bavel to Israel. So Rav Yosef didn't. Who's Rav Yosef bar Samchahu? How do you know Rav Yosef? Rav Yosef is somebody you can rely on. How do you know Rav Yosef? How do you know Rav Yosef? You can rely on his psak halacha. Just because he said you don't have to say for nechtam when you bring from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, maybe we don't paskin like Rav Yosef. And how do you know like this? I'll prove it to you. Rav Yosef was somewhat of an Amaretz because Rav Yehuda, Rav Yosef sent the message to Rabbi Yehuda, and the basic message was: how are people coming to learn in Israel and they're abandoning their families? Young men would come to learn in Israel and they would abandon their families. It's vayitnu as a yelad. People who come to learn from Bavel to come here to learn, they're keeping for themselves the pasuk. They're selling their kids away into harlotry because there's nobody supporting them, and there's no way for parnasa, and they're also stopping themselves from having any further children. So he wrote this pasuk. He just wrote it. This pasuk, that was the message. So he wrote a pasuk in the letter, the kos of lebeloy sirtet. He wrote it without scratching out a line underneath the pasuk. And there's a concept when you're writing a long pasuk in a letter, you have to do the sirtet. You have to do a scratch mark, a line mark underneath, like you have in a Sefer Torah. Shalish ein kaisvim, but masnit tana shalish kaisvim arba ke ein kaisvim. If you're writing 3 letters of a pasuk, you don't have to write. But and the Brisa says if you're writing 3 letters, 3 letters, you can write it without sirted. But if you're writing 4 letters, you can't write it without sirted. So here he wrote a whole pasuk. So there is no opinion. All opinions will agree that you must write a scratch mark when you're writing the letter. And Rav Yosef wrote this letter, did not write the scratch mark. So he must not be a Talmud Chacham. So how are you going to paskin like Rav Yosef? He's not a Talmud Chacham. Amalei Abaya Ati Kol de Lo Yoda Hod Rav Yitzchak Lav Gaver Rabbahu. Is anybody who doesn't know Rabbi Yitzchak's statement that you have to, when you're writing I didn't even know it, that when you're writing a pasuk in a letter that you're writing to a friend, you have to scratch out something neat. Does that make him, if he doesn't know that, he's not a Talmud Chacham? Bishlama, makes perfect sense. Milsa, the Talia Besvara, L'chai. If it's something logical, something that requires brains to figure it out, then if you tell me that he's not so quick and he doesn't have such a good head, then I'll believe you and then say maybe you can't rely on him in his psak halacha. Gemari, this is just a tradition. It's something you can't figure out. It's either you had the tradition of the brisa that you have to do sirtut or you didn't. Gemara, like Shmile, maybe in his yeshiva he didn't have that tradition and he had no books to look it up. So can't fault him from not knowing the halacha. So therefore, we're going to stop over here and we're going to conclude with what Rav Yosef said. Rav Yosef said, "Gittin haboim misham lekan." The get that comes from Bavel from Bavel, which is Chutzlar, not Chutzlar. It comes from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. You do not have to say b'fani nechta. And Rav Yosef is somebody you probably could rely on his psak halacha. We'll stop and continue with this sugya tomorrow.